Uh, Very warm welcome to everyone to our civic engagement charter with series of conversations and panel discussions on issues and greetings and welcome to Congressman Joe Kennedy to our discussions. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully your discussions. Very warm welcome to everyone to our civic engagement charter with hopefully your discussions and clarifications will help our community members to make an informed decision in these upcoming elections. Just to make sure, IAGB is a apolitical, non-profit, non-religious organization. We do not endorse anyone's opinion, any candidate or any party. Our objective is to provide a platform for the discussions and conversations. Opinions and views expressed by the guests solely belong to them, not IAGB. I know the time is very short. With that, good luck to you, Congressman, and Prag, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. And Congressman, very warm welcome again. Welcome to the IAGB Civic Forum. We were just talking offline, right? And that's actually almost the inspiration for this whole forum, Congressman. I mean, we all remember very well 2010 when Scott Brown, he won the seat after Ted Kennedy's demise. So, I mean, we all remember very well how it played a big role in sort of keeping filibuster where it is today, right? It was the 41st seat. And that kind of one of the inspiration behind making sure that this community, which has been very, very successful in a lot of other areas in the life, has been very passive when it comes to voting. So the whole idea behind IAGB Civic Forum is to promote people to really go out and vote. And in this COVID time, obviously it takes extra importance. So with that, let me not waste any time. I mean, nobody an introduction is not needed. For the last name Kennedy that you have, we were joking about it, that if you were running back in India, you would still get 50% vote out there. So it's something that runs well. But hopefully we'll spend time today as our core focus where we discuss the policies and we discuss the man behind those policies, right? So we'll focus a lot on Congressman Joe today. And let's see on all those angles. Now, before getting into the details, let's take kind of a checkpoint really, because we did reach out to our community congressman and we were asking as to what is it that you would want to know or you would want to hear from congressmen. So there are certain topics that we have selected. But before, like I said, we even take a deeper dive on those certain topics we have suggested, there is one baffling question in front of all of us. And if I can politely put it this way, that if we just go a few months back, Vice President Biden just swept this election here. And it's kind of surprising to many of us. It was because if at all, Massachusetts is a hotbed for progressive policies. It's a home state for Senator Warren. Senator Sanders can call it second home, but we all saw how Vice President Biden really won it big time. Now, why I'm giving that example, that fundamentally tells something, and in a state which has routinely selected a Republican governor as well, that people in this state really love to be in the center. They are really, if I can call it, more pragmatic rather than progressive, or really they think on more from an angle where they can really be close to the center rather than going extreme right or extreme left. That's how the state has voted. That's our observation. Would you want to take some time and kind of talk about we have heard you a few times in those forums like EJ92 and all that. You take also a lot of pride in saying that you are more pragmatic rather than progressive. But we'll leave it to you to define yourself. That will help people understand and see you in a different light as well. Please.
So, Prag and Sanjay, thank you so very much for having me. I'm honored to be able to spend some time with you this evening and wholeheartedly support your mission, which is to make sure that an Indian American community is able to engage fruitfully and knowledgeably in our democracy, because it's you help shape our communities, you're shaping our country, you're shaping our nation and our future. And I would hope that every member of the Indian American community would feel ownership and engagement and a shared responsibility about our democracy and participate in it. That is what we need. And certainly we need more of. Now, just briefly, and I'll get to your question, if there's a common thread, I think, that links the election of Donald Trump and the devastation of COVID-19 and this moment of racial justice that we're experiencing, it is a government that has become too disconnected from its people. And the way you fix that is you get more people engaged in that process, more people voting, and you have candidates and public servants, elected officials that are more connected to our communities we can explore that a little bit more going forward. Look, with regards to and to your observation, I think Massachusetts voters, the state as a whole, particularly at a federal level, tilts strongly Democratic, and I think that goes without saying. But I think many people are surprised to know that over 50% of the voters in Massachusetts are independent, otherwise known as unenrolled. They haven't selected a Democrat or Republican Party to affiliate with. Now, that being said, I don't think looking at the results of any one election are necessarily dispositive because of the myriad eccentricities that take place in any one of those elections. You mentioned the presidential one. Yes, Vice President Biden surprised many by winning Massachusetts, and it was an extraordinary feat for him. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders combined still got over 50%. Right now, that was still a Democratic primary for the presidential election. There was about 1.4 million votes cast out of about 4.5 million registered voters in the state. So what we will see in November is an entirely different electorate that has different characteristics and a different message coming from it. But the race coming up on Tuesday is a Democratic primary, which will have in all likelihood, a smaller turnout than the one we saw in March for the presidential election. Although that prediction at the moment is also fuzzy because of the impact of vote by mail. So I think writ large, hard to draw the conclusions off of any one election. I will say, I think you are right, where Massachusetts does oftentimes seek balance, right? We've got an overwhelmingly Democratic state legislature. They like a Republican governor. You have an overwhelmingly Democratic federal delegation that is pushing for the values that I think most Massachusetts residents share when it comes to healthcare, immigration, education. And on a whole, that are more comfortable with an activist and engaged method of governance to address some of the inequities we see. And I think that on the whole is the story of Massachusetts. And from my perspective, one where I try to lean into, because I do see inequities out there. I see people that are hurting and suffering. And I think government can make a difference for them. And I'm not going to wait until I can come up with a perfect solution to address their needs if we can help address that suffering today, even if that means being a bit more pragmatic about a solution.
So, Congressman, so to stretch that little bit further, but again, taking it in the context of Indian Americans, and again, I'm very generally speaking here, if you can put Indian Americans in one single box, one thing is that we are generally fiscally conservative. And what we mean by that is that we are net savers and we are debt averse. So with this background, like most of us behaving in such a way for our own pocketbooks, when we look at the nation, and there are many times we get worried, we get concerned about the spending. And I understand right now there is a 13% unemployment. GDP was dropped by 32% in the last quarter. So do you draw a line anywhere where you would say that, no, at this is not what I will cross? Or is there any circumstance where you would say right now the economy is rebounding, or this is where we are and this is the time when we have to rein in? So because if you see the messaging, the Democrats get beaten down that we are spending, but truthfully both the parties are spending. It is just that the messaging goes in one way. So what is your own personal philosophy in this?
Sanjay, you're 100% right. I mean, the interesting politics on that is that deficits have traditionally soared under Republican presidents, not Democratic ones. Oftentimes spurred by tax cuts that Republicans have put through without offsetting them in terms of revenue. So my own take on this, I think, is actually roughly in line with what you said. So the moment that we are in right now, I think calls for a massive economic stimulus by the federal government because of this enormous economic shock that we went through. And the only entity that has the ability to try to keep paychecks moving, rent, pay mortgages, pay somebody's rent, pay car loans, and just literally stave off economic catastrophe is the federal government. So with every economist that I've spoken with, the danger at the moment is by going too small rather than too big. And so I think at the moment we absolutely have to keep that system of liquidity flowing through that system. I also recognize, Sanjay, that when you're talking about $3 trillion the Congress has already spent, $4 trillion plus that the Federal Reserve has essentially injected into the economy, another $3 trillion that has been passed from the House from the HEROES Act, that's a lot of money. And that's my grandkids' money. Exactly. And at a certain point, when you start adding up trillions, as anybody, as I think many have said, no one can tell you where exactly that line is. And thank God interest rates have remained lower than people expected. But at some point, I do believe interest rates are going to go up. And so I think we do have to go through some fiscal planning here with some eye towards the future about, yes, being aggressive now to stave off economic devastation, but recalibrating our economic structure and our tax structure into a progressive taxation, where we're able to recoup the investment that we need to then also invest in social programs like, by the way, universal childcare, which is literally some of the best money we could spend. We still don't, and it's much to the detriment of our country. Investing in that human capital will pay off massive returns in the long run. And so I would favor recalibrating that framework, making investments in our human capital and a progressive taxation system to make sure that you don't just run the risk of long-term economic devastation.
Very well said, Congressman. And if I can kind of just go back, and one thing that did not get enough attention, or at least in Indian American community, is the fact that you so strongly supported the whole idea of moral capitalism, right? That's almost your brainchild. That's almost the baby. We would love to hear it a little bit more about it, because that's so unique to you. And somehow it's kind of getting lost with so many other topics popping up. Why don't you take a few minutes and talk about moral capitalism?
Thank you. So, I traveled around the country back in 2018 as part of my job as a member of Congress, trying to campaign for other colleagues and other candidates to flip the House of Representatives into Democratic hands so that we would be able to hold the administration accountable and pass policies that I values on the ones that I share. And as I was traveling around the country, I came to the conclusion that some of the ways in which Democrats talk about the economy or frame these points just didn't fit. It wasn't, you go to West Virginia, or you go to the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, you go to Indiana, you go to old industrial manufacturing communities in Massachusetts. Each one's unique. Each one has a bit of a different story to tell. And the thing that I felt more than anything was not, the narrative had been around economic mobility and then economic inequity. I fundamentally don't believe at this point that you are going to redistribute your way wholly to success here, right? It's not about redistribution is an important piece to this, don't get me wrong. And a progressive taxation system is critical. But just because you tax a wealthy person at a higher rate doesn't necessarily mean a middle-class family can afford a home or childcare, unless you make those investments the right way. And so what I tried to articulate under that moral capitalism framework was a series of economic reforms that centered an American family and the needs of an American worker, that looks at things like our taxation system and like the minimum wage, which are much discussed, but also things like no poach clauses and non-compete agreements, issues around the erosion of worker power and the aggregation of corporate power, issues around temp workers, and issues around everything from stock buybacks to other ways in which we see corporations reap the profits, but not necessarily share them with their employees, and try to recalibrate that power back to the center of a worker. Take on challenges like universal childcare. We here obviously think that and identify public education as one of the fundamental public goods, and say from age 5 onward through high school, it's free for any resident. And we make a big commitment to that. But we don't think of anything about birth to 5, when 90% of your child's brain is developed by age 5. And oh yeah, by the way, in Massachusetts, the cost of childcare from birth to 5 every year exceeds the cost of college tuition. It's more expensive to care for your baby than to send that kid to college. You get 18 years and a tax incentive savings plan to do it, which, by the way, when we look at the larger spectrum here around economic inequity, if it's 20 grand a year to pay for childcare, that's a down payment on a $500,000 a year or a $500,000 house. You get 2 kids, that's a down payment on a $1 million home. That is your wealth aggregation. That is your nest egg. That is the disparity that we're seeing. Well, we can recalibrate some of these incentives here and make sure that families are able to actually save that money and invest in their children, rather than just trying to actually barely struggle to survive and hope to make ends meet and then not have any savings to show for it in the long run. And that's what we're really trying to get at. Recognizing the power of the system to create wealth, but also saying that wealth has to be shared, it has to be distributed more equitably.
Right. Fascinating. I mean, that's a topic that we would love to probably have a
I'd
discussion
love
with
to.
for hours and hours, right? But keeping ourselves honest to the whole agenda. Now, obviously, there cannot be a discussion on Thursday evening when there is a commitment march tomorrow happening in DC, right? So, and then it's just amazing. I mean, just like moral capitalism you spoke about, Congressman, we have seen you evolving amazingly. I mean, let me put it this way: I mean, when we look into how the Black Caucus, the leaders like Martin Luther King III or John Lewis, they have come in support of you. And from a person, I mean, and we, in one of the debate, we heard that obviously in the past you were involved with Kappa Alpha as well. So a person's involvement is just amazing how much support you have in there. So would you want to talk about the journey when people were asking you questions about being a part of a college fraternity, to the fact that all of Black caucuses or the strong Latino leaders are really coming and openly endorsing you? I mean, talk to us about your whole journey, if you can.
So I've been committed to issues of racial inequity for a long time, predating my career in Congress. And I've tried to make sure that in the work that I have done as an elected official, that we've tried to tackle some of those inequities, because I think, as we've seen, particularly over the course of the past several months, the issues around racial justice, they're at the core of our economic inequity, they're at the core of healthcare inequity, they're at the core of environmental inequity. When we're talking about investments in transportation or housing or healthcare, we have to address the structural inequities that have persisted in this nation literally for hundreds of years. And the lack of willingness to do this at every level of government, federal, state, and local, has enabled those inequities to perpetuate, such that we now have, as of pre-COVID-19 in 2018, the median network, that is, we might both identify the same problem. Writing a bill and filing legislation is critically important. Just because you file legislation doesn't mean the problem is solved. And just because you pass a bill doesn't mean the issue is resolved either. It means this takes a constant and deliberate and intentional and relentless effort on every different aspect of this job to address those inequities. And to the core of that is just to help make sure people are seen and heard and can achieve their own aspirations. That's what this job allows you to do. And that's what I've tried to do with it.
Wonderful. Would you have a message?
To get back I'm sorry, because you were talking about the inequities, I just wanted to get your view on the law that Trump repealed, the Fair Housing Act, I forgot the name of it, that Obama era had passed. Is that something very important for you, and would you fight to get it back on the books?
So I'm not sure exactly which law you're referring to.
The Fair Housing Act.
The FHA is supposed to be a seminal law to try to make sure that we were to make sure that to eliminate the redlining in this country. So essentially segregation in the housing markets. I think there's ample evidence to prove that the law itself has not been anywhere near sufficient at actually ending that discrimination in housing. And we've seen their studies as recently as this summer that have shown that those inequities still persist. And I think what we've seen here, Sanjay, is again the kind of insidious nature of that discrimination, whether it's from the federal level, from federal legislation down to local zoning laws, where we'll see obstacles put forward to creation of affordable housing stock, or just housing that is affordable. And I think this is where it takes a full-scale commitment from obviously members of a community to be able to say, look, we believe in economic opportunity. We believe that every person, every family, every child should have that chance. And we're willing to make that commitment to make sure that people are able to gain access to communities that otherwise, with these restrictive covenants, remain out of reach. And so I think, again, there's levels of this federal, state, and local that all have to be addressed and dismantled.
Would you have a message, Congressman, for a community, if I can be brutally honest, an Indian American community that has been often blamed to be a bystander during these race relations? I mean, Indian American community has been oftenly called out that why are you not so actively involved in all the race related challenges that this country is facing? I mean, like somebody jokingly said, brown is just a different shade of black.
Well, Parag, I think we have seen an increase, as you know, an increased number of hate crimes against an Indian diaspora over the course of the past several years. There is no doubt that Indians of all ethnicities, whether that's Hindu or Sikh or Muslim, Jain, Buddhist, otherwise, have felt that sting of discrimination even here in the United States, and perhaps particularly here, sometimes in the United States. And those incidents, there's some that are very well known, and without question, thousands more that go unreported. And so I'm not so sure we can say that Indian American community has been on the sidelines of it, because I think you've far too often also been the victims of it. I do think that, look, from my own perspective on this, as obviously a privileged white guy, I think one of the lessons I take of this moment, from the murder of George Floyd to the shooting of Jacob Blake, is that we can't, none of us, the work that we have done so far, all of us as a collective, has been insufficient. And that if we're really committed to trying to say not one more, then every one of us has to make that commitment to try to make sure that that comes to pass. And look, that comes on, certainly that responsibility is borne by members of Congress, by people of privilege, certainly me at the top of that list. But I think it's also something that we have to say, each and every one of us can and needs to do more. And that this is a nation, obviously, that we all share, and that responsibility isn't going to be, is shared as well. Because if we don't do it, I don't think anybody will.
Got it. Wonderful. Very well said. I mean, we hope your passion to really stand up for the people of color really rub on the whole community, and they put more weight behind that. So let me switch the gear a bit, Congressman, and obviously to this Indian American community, which is really as passionate as this community is about what's happening locally here, is also equally concerned or passionate about what's going on back in our homeland, back in India. Mm-hmm. And obviously with everything revolving around China, with a lot of we had a almost warlike situation. Let me ask you a question a bit more towards the future part, right? So if you are selected as senator, Congressman, you go to the Senate. Historically, from this state, we have not had great coverage for India, in a way that the voting patterns has not been something that Indian American takes with a lot of pride. So can we expect you to really be that voice for Indian America, or India in particular, where, let me take an example, NSG, Nuclear Supply Group. Would we get yes from you if you are in Senate on that? And another example, if I can take, and feel free to really answer one or both, or whichever way you feel, because it's always in future I'm talking. Second could be India has been trying to get a permanent seat in Security Council. I mean, a nation, one of the most responsible nation, if you just look at the history, never invaded anybody. One of the nations that really will probably potentially define how successful humanity is when you have 1 billion plus people sitting out there, right? So a place that should justifiably be there in Security Council. What would be your position on those two major issues that really stands for India?
Look, I think so, a lot there. And so let me break it down. I get piece by piece. So first off, the United States and India are extremely good friends, and we need to continue to be. And I think the role of U.S. foreign policy is to ensure that those connections become deeper and more intertwined, and more successful, more prosperous for both the United States and India for the next century. As you know, and you've heard me say and others say many times, we're talking about the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. We are united fundamentally on values. Indian Constitution modeled after the United States, but even more liberal than that of the United States. And so there's a base level of shared values, of common vision, of protection of human dignity that I think is inherent there, that links our two nations, that provides for an extraordinary amount of cooperation and achievement for both countries going forward. I think candidly, that also means from the United States, treating India as an equal, right? And not looking at this as a power dynamic between a more developed country and a developing country. India's arrived, right? And so treating India as an equal partner here, I think is critically important, particularly given the challenges that India confronts. It's a challenging neighborhood, to put it mildly. And with some nations that don't always share values for the United States and are engaged in competition, whether it's economically, politically, militarily, with the United States, literally on a daily basis, and it has been for a long time, particularly when we look at Pakistan and obviously the tensions that are growing with China. And so I look at this not just as a question of shared values, but also in addition to obviously strategic interests for commerce, for military, and for the spread and protection of fundamental freedoms and democracy around the world, given, again, some of the measures and tactics used by and employed by some others in that neighborhood. So I think the future between the United States and India is very bright, and needs to be, and is in our effort, is in our interest and India's. Now, just briefly on that, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be complications. This administration picked a fight with Canada, right? Like, I mean, there's complications. We had challenges with a trade agreement with Mexico and the EU, right? Like, good friends have disagreements. That's fine. Particularly when you're talking about 1 billion people in the interest of 1 billion people in India and 350 million people in the United States. There's got to be competition there. We set those standards high, that we compete on those values, and that we work together to achieve them, understanding that competition is not bad, and that things can get complex, but that fundamentally a stronger, more robust democratic partner in Asia is a huge benefit to the United States. And so, yes to the NSG, right? And I think President Obama was right when he said India's time here has clearly arrived. UN and UN reform is a very big topic, particularly when we start to unpack some of the challenges there. I would certainly be open to the idea that India has earned a right at the National Security Council, as you articulated. And there's a number of reforms that I think we're seeing need to be done at the UN to update the structures there to the 21st century, particularly given power geopolitics and what that future is going to look like.
Wonderful, Congressman. I'm so glad that you did not really shy away from giving a very clear answer to the two questions that I had. I loved hearing every word you said, but I was really waiting for yes and no on those two questions, and you had it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the clock too. So we had asked some questions from the community. So there are quite a few questions, but they're very diverse topics. So certainly we don't have time. So one question that very much can be asked towards the end of our conversation is from Usha Pillai. Her question, I'm just reading it verbatim. Congressman Kennedy, there appears to be many similarities between you and Senator Markey when it comes to policy. What do you plan to do differently if you are elected to the Senate?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. So the biggest difference between myself and Senator Markey is literally how we define the job of being a United States Senator. The senator has said that this is the primary responsibility is about the votes that you cast and the bills that you file. And look, I agree that's an important part of being a senator. I wholeheartedly disagree that that's where the job ends. And let me give you some examples here. One, I think that if you're going to represent the people of Massachusetts, you have to be here in Massachusetts. Senator Markey, before this campaign, spent less than a week a month here. He lives outside of Washington, D.C. I don't think that you can lead Massachusetts if you are not in this state. I don't think that you can claim to know what is going on in our communities. I'm talking to you tonight from Lowell after I was just in Lawrence and Methuen. I don't think you can claim to know what's going on in our communities, in our streets, from Pittsfield to Gloucester to Cape Cod, if you are not present here asking people questions and engaging in forums like this one, but not just every 6 years, continually, so that you know if we provided $1 trillion of PPP, but many immigrant businesses didn't get it because you didn't know how to navigate it because of language barriers or cultural barriers or whatever else, then the $1 trillion there doesn't mean anything to you because you didn't get a dime of it. You got to be here. One, two, you got to be in Washington. You're fighting for us, voting for us, being our voice. But the fact is that since COVID hit our shores in Massachusetts, up until this August recess, Senator Markey missed about 50% of all of the votes in Washington at a time when we're trying to rebuild our economy and plan for a public health crisis. He wasn't there. I don't think that's acceptable. Third, if you believe that we need to build to the change to actually create the substantive, the structural change that we need, and you need the political change to do it, you're a United States Senator from Massachusetts. Go out there and fight for it. As a House member, last cycle in 2018, I was in nearly 20 states in dozens of districts around the country, helping to flip the House, enabling us to pass a far more robust COVID-19 rescue package, hold this administration accountable. Senator Markey was literally in zero, not one. So it's great to say that you want to pass Medicare for all or Green New Deal, but if you know that Republicans aren't going to vote for it, if you're not out there fighting for it, you're not going to get it. And lastly, ma'am, perhaps most importantly, so in addition to the presence here in Massachusetts and the fight in Washington and the change around the country, fundamentally for me, this job is about providing the assistance of the federal government to people at the time of need. You get to help. Your job is to help. But when a family like Colin Bauer, a dad whose two sons had been kidnapped by his ex-wife and she fled to Egypt, and he asked for Senator Markey's help in reuniting himself with his sons and getting visitation. According to Mr. Bauer, Senator Markey was on his phone and never in the meeting and never returned a phone call. The Henry family, whose young Black son was murdered by a white police officer in Westchester County, New York, had a similar experience where they met with a senator, asked for his help seeking justice for their son, and in their words, did nothing, dismissed them, and insulted them during the meeting. I think you deserve more from your senator. I think whether you're a family in need or a Commonwealth that is expecting the most you can offer, that's what you should expect every single day. And I promise you, I will give you everything I can to fight for you every single day, because this is my home. It's where I'm raising my kids. My future and your future here in Massachusetts are linked. I'll never forget that.
Wonderful, Congressman. Very well said.
A lot of phone calls from Indian Americans down the road, Congressman.
So let me just have a last question, Congressman. And we started with the fact that Scott Brown's election really stopped filibuster from happening. And there is a lot of talk, obviously, and you took an early position on filibuster, right? So are you still in for it? And if I can just put a little bit of data on the point, I mean, you might want to talk about the scenarios that has made you look for this change. And why I'm saying this, because back in 2004, the one most prominent senator who was against filibuster was future President Barack Obama. So from that point to Scott Brown's election to now. And so you can also take this question and put some closing remarks for the community. And after that, I'll call upon our Vice President Vaishali to close it. So over to you, Congressman.
So on the filibuster, I am for ending it. And President Obama actually recently came out in favor of ending it too. And I think an indication of how it's been abused throughout its history and still today. And look, so the filibuster is essentially a rule in the Senate that says in order to pass policy legislation, you need to have 60 votes. It is next to impossible to get 60 members, whether Democrat or Republican, to come together on a major piece of policy. And so essentially what happens is policy passes the House, gets roadblocked in the Senate, doesn't pass, and a president then moves by executive action to try to expand his authority to fill that void, which is detrimental to our policy, our people, and our system of government. I believe that we should end it. And ending the filibuster, it's important to know, really only matters when one party has the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Because if an opposition party is in power there, then you got to work with the opposition. The other piece that's important to know is the filibuster only impacts social policy, because there's an arcane rule called reconciliation that enables the Senate with majority rule to pass bills associated with the budget. So Republicans actually passed their big tax cut with 51 votes through reconciliation. They tried to repeal healthcare with 51 votes through reconciliation. So it really impacts things like immigration, gun violence legislation, LGBT rights, social policy that in many respects, the vast majority of our country wants us to do, but because it's not budgetary in nature, we're not allowed to. And I would much prefer to end, rather than fight over what's budgetary, I would much prefer to end the filibuster, pass a series of democracy reforms that the House of Representatives has called for, ending gerrymandering, campaign finance reform, strengthen the Voting Rights Act, increased disclosure laws for campaign finance and others. Make sure you have a country more responsive to the will of its people. And then let us run election. And if Democrats win the House, Senate, and presidency, then great, pass your agenda. And if you don't, then fine. Republicans can pass their agenda, but I would rather have Republicans have the House, Senate, and presidency off of electorate that they actually won, rather than what happened back in 2019, where they had the House, Senate, and presidency when they actually didn't. And I put that on Democrats to say, if we have a system that is more responsive to the needs of our people, then we should be responsive to our people, and we should have confidence that our agenda is actually in line with theirs. And so that's where I come down on the filibuster. With regards to closing comments, just briefly here, look, this race for me is about our future and is about our willingness to choose. We are at a moment of reckoning in our nation with so much pain and hurt and disruption over the course of the past several months and certainly the past several years. We have a choice as to whether we want to build something better or as to whether we are going to go back to the old normal and think that that is good enough. But if you think we can build something better, I fundamentally don't believe we're going to get there by sending the same people with the same ideas and the same method of thinking to go and try again and come up with something new. And I've spent months traveling around this Commonwealth and years traveling around our country. We are good, decent people that are willing to do anything they can for their future, for the future of their families and their kids and for our communities. I think you deserve a senator that's going to fight the same way for your future as well. And that's what I'm asking for. That because I believe you deserve it. I believe our country should demand it, particularly at this moment. And I'd like that chance to be able to serve you in that way in the United States Senate. I ask for your vote on September 1st, and I look forward to working with you for the next 6 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck to you, Congressman.
Thank you. So grateful to you.
Yeah. Vaishali.
Yep. Congressman Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know you have a hard stop, but I'm sure our members, Indian American voters, appreciate your take, your stance on various issues that really, really matter to us. Thanks again for making a stop here at IIGB Civic Platform on your campaign trail. Wish you all the best for your campaign and, of course, for the primaries. Thank you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Now for our viewers, I just want to reiterate, IIGB is a political organization. We are not promoting any political candidates or political party. Our objective is just to present an opportunity to our guests to bring forward their viewpoints and their stands on any of the party's platform and why should we vote for them. The views expressed by the candidates on this platform belong solely to the candidates and not necessarily to IIGB. We also have a great lineup of panel discussions that matter to you leading up to the presidential primaries. So do watch IIGB emails and Facebook announcements for further civic engagement series episodes. And don't forget to vote at the state primaries on September 1st. And of course, if you haven't already registered, please register and vote. Thanks for joining today and good night.